At this point, we are beginning the sequence of lectures and laboratory on simulation and analysis in design. But before we go seriously into simulation, we would like to look at the governing equations that the finite element solutions are all about. Based on the components we have created already, we will look at the hinges that we have made, the simple connecting rod from the moving part. The unknown variables, as I said, are two tensors and a vector. These, at each point in the solid and on the boundary, are, number one, the vector displacement. They are all the displacement, relative displacement, resulting from loading after removing all rigid-bodied motions. This is a vector quantity and therefore consists of three scalars. The next thing is the tensor strain. It's a symmetrical tensor containing 6 scalars. And the last one is the stress tensor, which is also a symmetrical tensor containing 6 scalars. This is the tensor responsible for the tractions that can make the material fail. The tensors strain and stress plus the displacement, that makes it 15 unknown variables. The governing equations. The governing equations are, the first one is the Cauchy's first law of motion or of equilibrium. Cauchy's law is essentially a restatement of Newton's laws of motion as they apply to solid bodies rather than particles. As you are taught in your elementary physics, the Newton's laws of motion are not very useful if we are to apply them to solid objects because they essentially are dealing with the motion of particles. And a solid body contains millions of particles, so you cannot start solving millions of equations at once. That would be a difficult way to go. So, from Cauchy's stress principle to Cauchy's law, we get the first Cauchy's law of motion, which restates the balance of momentum in the way it relates to physical solid bodies. And that will give us three equations in scalar quantities, but a single vector equation. The second are the strain displacement relationships. Strain itself is a definition, and there are several definitions of strain in common use. For our purpose here, and in Fusion 360, you are going to be seeing the Lagrangian strain. So we are going to concentrate on that particular definition of strain. That is the measure of deformation. There are other ones, such as the deformation gradient, the Eulerian strain, and so many other forms of strain measure. But we concentrate on this. The strain displacement relationships constitute 6 equations, or a single tensor equation. The last, and not the least, is the constitutive equation for linear elastic materials. This is the simplest case that we would look at. All other cases are more difficult and more complicated than this one. So let us first of all start with the simple, easy case. The constitutive equation we are dealing with is a generalization of the Hookean idea of linearity between stress and strain. Again, this is much wider than the elementary notion because you cannot just say force is equal to a constant times extension, because here you are looking at 9 stress components and 9 strain components. So which one is proportional to which? Actually, the 9 stress components are proportional to all the 9 strain components, which would ordinarily give us 81 constants. But for the linear elastic material that is homogeneous and isotropic, it can be proved, and it has been proved, that only 2 of these constants are important in any consideration. So usually, you are going to have a constitutive equation containing only 2 constants. Linearity and elasticity. Elasticity is the property that a material returns to its initial state once the forces are taken off it. Linearity itself only talks about proportionality between stress and strain. Now, these two things are not necessarily the same. In fact, linearity does not necessarily imply elasticity, and the opposite is also not true. It is possible to have materials that are non-linearly elastic, such as rubber and other vulcanized elastomers, which are hyperelastic. There are materials that are hypoelastic, viscous elasticity, plasticity. So many other kinds of constitution exist. But for now, we are going to be looking at materials where we impose not only the elasticity constraint, but they are also linearly elastic. So let's look at the equations now. The first equation, as we said, is the first law of motion by Cauchy. And it states, as we can see here, that the divergence of the stress tensor plus the body force per unit volume is equal to the density multiplied by the acceleration. F here is the body force per unit volume, and rho is the mass density. If there is no acceleration, then u dot dot is equal to 0, the zero vector, and the body is in equilibrium. So it is an equation of motion when u is not 0, and it's an equation of equilibrium when u is 0. If in addition the body force is not important, and we can equate it to 0, then the entire equation becomes the equilibrium equation, which simply states that the divergence of the stress tensor is 0. So that would be our first equation. As I said, it is a vector equation because the divergence of a tensor quantity is actually a vector. The next equation of interest to us among the governing equations is the definition of the Lagrangian strain and the relationship to the displacement. It states that E is equal to half of grad U plus the transpose of grad U plus the product of the transpose of grad U and grad U itself. This is a non-linear partial differential equation unless the strain is small and the last term is assumed to be close to 0. The last equation of interest to us here are the constitutive equations. As we said earlier, it is a generalization of the Hooke's law. And here, we state it in one of the many ways of stating it, which states that the stress tensor is equal to lambda multiplied by the identity tensor, the trace of E, plus 2 mu multiplied by the strain tensor. The Lamech constants, lambda and mu, are assumed to be known material properties, where I is the identity tensor and the trace of the tensor is a scalar quantity, which is simply the sum of the scalar normal strain components. Other forms of this equation exist, and we will be seeing them in due course. As we said, if the last term is ignored, then we are going to get a linear equation. In order to get a feel for what the finite element package is really doing, it is a good idea to see these equations in the scalar, more familiar forms. These tensor forms are very simple and they are deceptively simple. If you see the equations in this form and you don't see it in any other form than this, you will not really realize what the finite element processors are doing. So let us just take a look. But before we do that, I have a mathematical code which I will give you a link to it. If you can download that mathematical code, you will just put in the tensor equation and it can give you the scalar equations in any coordinate system of your choice. In this particular lecture, we are going to only show the Cartesian equations, which are the simplest of the 3 commonly used coordinate systems in engineering, which are the Cartesian, cylindrical, and spherical systems. The governing equations in Cartesian coordinates. First, this is the Cauchy's first law, that the divergence of the, here is what we need. These are the expressions of the divergence of the stress tensor in the x coordinate. This is the same divergence of the stress tensor in y coordinate, and this is the divergence of the same stress tensor in the z coordinate. And these are the body forces in x, y, and z coordinates, and these are density times acceleration in those 3 coordinates. So you have 3 equations from the Cauchy's first law. The strain displacement equations in Cartesian coordinates. Here you have Exx is equal to this is the linear part and this is the nonlinear product part. Again, the linear part, the nonlinear product part for each of the 6 expressions. In the case of the shear strains, you have that the linear and the nonlinear part are relatively mixed here, but they can be removed and separated if we need to. In the situation where the strains are small, as we said earlier on, the nonlinear part, the product part will vanish, and all we will have left are the linear parts. So the equations become relatively simpler. So let's compare the full equations of the Lagrangian strain to the infinitesimal strain Lagrangian in this situation. So you can see amount of simplicity that arrives that are at our disposal once we can assume the strain is small. Unfortunately, the more we use modern materials, the less this assumption can hold, because most modern materials are non-metallic and they are therefore often subjected to large deformation. So once this deformation is large, even when you have a linear constitutive material, that material itself can be geometrically non-linear. So linearity must come from all possible sides for the linearity to be sustained in the governing equations. When any part of the equation is non-linear, then the entire set of governing equations becomes non-linear, and we have to use a non-linear model. But for our starting point, we are going to assume that the equations we are dealing with are linear and we can ignore the product part of this expression. The generalized Hooke's law in Cartesian coordinates is looking like this now because we are using the Lamens coefficient. If we decide to use another pair of constants such as the modulus of elasticity and the Poisson ratio, it will look slightly different from this, but it will still be equivalent to this because of the relationship between all the elastic moduli for linear situations. The elastic moduli are related. Therefore, no matter how you express these equations, they will be the same. It just turns out that this way of expressing them is the easiest for the tensor analysis. These equations, as is said, are highly nonlinear and impossible to solve in closed form of elementary functions, except in the simplest of geometry, constraint, and loading conditions. And they have engaged the minds of the greatest mathematical physicists and engineers for nearly 2 centuries. For practical applications, engineers depend on approximate numerical solutions. The finite element package inside Fusion 360, called Nastran, is one popular such packages. But it is not magic. It needs a certain depth of understanding of what's going on and preparation to work properly so to arrive at correct solutions. If you don't supply the proper boundary conditions or make any mistake in the use of these equations, you're going to get garbage. Elasticity, plasticity, viscoelasticity, and all the continuum mechanics subjects are designed to do three things. One, to set the kinematic relations and obtain the results of the application of balance laws on the body. It is in that formulation that the first 2 governing equations, which are the Cauchy's law of motion and the strain displacement relationships, are obtained. These subjects are covered by the subject continuum mechanics, and the equations they arrive at are essentially the same for all materials because they are just expressing the natural laws which everyone is subject to. Remember, Newton says every body moves in a state of uniform motion or is in a state of rest unless a force acts on it. That means everybody, whether it is metal or water or human beings or animals, everybody. Now, the second thing continuum mechanics courses do is to describe the material constitution in the constitutive equations. In our present case, the constitutive equations we are going to be using are the generalized Hooke's law. But applies only to the simplest case where we are looking at linearly elastic materials. Once we are no longer looking at linearly elastic materials, if we are looking at non-linearly elastic materials, the generalized Hooke's law will not work. We will have to look at another set of constitutive equations that are based on the strain energy density. But that's not what we are about at this present. Apart from, after establishing the governing equations based on the natural laws, the constitutive equations based on the material properties that of what we are looking at, the next thing that our set of equations are concerned with is to seek closed form solutions to these problems. Historically important solutions are well documented, and they are the basic starting points for the engineers, physicists, and computer scientists that write finite element analysis code. Now, let's talk about the boundary conditions. The boundary conditions that govern the particular equations you are interested in are completely unknown to the finite element package. It is now up to you, because you are the person doing the designing, to specify what those boundary conditions are. Finite element packages know the equations already and they can solve them, but they will solve them for the boundary conditions to supply. It is therefore necessary to be very conscious of the fact that our design training is essentially not to solve the finite element, not to solve the equations, the governing equations themselves, but to be able to correctly specify the constraints, the boundary conditions, the contacts, and all the other things surrounding those equations. No matter how powerful the finite element analysis package itself is, it knows nothing about your loading conditions and constraints. You must have sufficient knowledge of what's going on to supply these correctly. The formulation of correct boundary conditions for a particular design is a major part of design engineering training. Now, results and interpretation. As already mentioned, the variables we are trying to find are two tensors and one vector. In reality, we are usually thinking only in terms of scalar quantities. Now, there are certain scalar quantities that can characterize the tensors of importance. As for the vector, as you know, for any vector, there are two important scalars, and these are its magnitude and its direction. Once you know those two, you know everything you need to know about the tensor, about the vector. Similarly, the tensor quantities are such that if the proper scalars are known, everything important about those tensors too are known. For a typical tensor, these are three scalars, and they are called the invariants of the tensor. There are several ways of formulating the invariants of the tensor. They are not as specific as magnitude and direction are to the vector. Of particular importance to designers is the positive square root of the second principal invariant of the deviatoric stress tensor. It has a name. It is named after a great physicist called von Mises. So it is called the von Mises stress. The value attained by this scalar is a value that can often be compared to the stress level of your design, be it yield, ultimate tensile stress, whatever, which are themselves scalars. And sure enough, that is one of the data prominent in Fusion 360 result output. Before we move on, let us remember that even though the von Mises stress is very important, it does not fully characterize the tensor. It is just one, just like you cannot fully characterize a vector by simply knowing its magnitude. You must also know its direction. If you want a full characterization of the stress tensor, you will need to know at least three principal invariants. There are several ways of measuring this, but for our use now, we just know that we will be coming across the von Mises stress, and it is just one of the invariants that we might be interested in. So let us go right now to the Fusion 360 design. Here you see our first major componentized design, which I call the landmark hinge, because I saw this particular hinge for the first time at Landmark University. So this hinge, as you can see, consists of three parts. What the first part, if we look at it one by one, is the outer, which is this one. And then the second part is the inner, which is this one. And what binds them together is the pin, which is this. So we are going to subject this whole hinge body to loads. And we are going to model the kinds of loads that the hinge is likely to experience in its service life. First of all, before we look at the loads, we need to specify the constraints. And to specify the constraints, we must first of all move into the simulation environment. But before we do that, let us know that we can still get a lot of design information out of the model workspace. For example, if we take a look at the outer, which is this one, and we right click, if we right click on it, or we can right click on any one of them, outer, inner, pin. If we right click on any one of them, we have a lengthy drop down menu from activate, ground, move, copy. Many of these you have already used when you are creating your own component yourself. But of this, there is one here called properties. If you look at the properties drop down here, we just choose it. If we choose the property, like now, we have chosen the property of the pin. Let us take a look at the pin. Let us make the pin alone visible. So that's the pin. That's the pin now. Part number pin, part name pin. It tells us the surface area of the pin in square millimeters, the density of this pin based on the material that we chose for it, the mass, the volume, the physical material, and then the coordinates, the center of mass. And then it has two things that we have to expand there if we want to see them. That's the moment of inertia at the center of mass, as well as the moment of inertia at origin. And this, if we can open this tab, you will get to this 9 components. That's the moment of inertia at the center of mass, because there are 9 components for the moment of inertia. That immediately tells you that the moment of inertia is a tensor quantity consisting of 9 components. And it turns out that this particular tensor is symmetric because because you can see that Ixy here is equal to Iyx and so on, and everything here is there's symmetry across all the non-diagonal elements. We will get the same. We will get the same thing if we chose the inner. If we right click on the inner instead of pin, let us cancel this one. If we right click on this inner and its color changes, if we look at its own properties here, again we have the properties of this. So for any component, even within the model workspace, you are able to get as many properties defined, because you have just completed your model. Just as soon as you complete your model, you can request for those properties. But let's move on now to the simulation workspace. If we want to go to the simulation workspace, we just go down here, click this model thing button here, and we move to the simulation. Now, because this is not the first time I'm moving to simulation, it didn't ask me for anything. But in your own case, the first time you get to simulation, you are going to be asked you are going to be presented with a different screen. So in order for us to see that kind of screen, let me try to create a new simulation. If I try to create a new simulation study, that will give you the kind of experience you are going to have the first time you are moving to the simulation. So you get to this screen. This is the screen you get to. And when you say you want a new simulation study, you are presented with the options of the simulations that Fusion 360 allows you to do. One is static stress. The next one is modal frequencies, thermal stresses, structural buckling, nonlinear static stress analysis, event simulation, and shape optimization. Shape optimization is very interesting. We will still get to that after we picked one or two of these other models. Shape optimization helps you to really study a shape and decide whether there are some parts of the material that are not necessary, so you can save money and reduce the amount of material usage. And that's a very interesting thing in design. Here in this first page, before you even click OK after selecting your static stress, you can go to this button here at this corner here and do some initial settings. If you come here, you can see you can have general setting with the name. You can name, let me name this one now as video demo. So it's video demo that we are doing here. So I've named it. You can remove rigid body modes. You can then go to the mesh section, and in the mesh section you can decide on such things as average element size, which here is set at 10%, and then you can choose between these two. You can either select an absolute minimum size of your mesh, or you can scale mesh size per part. We choose in this particular model, the first one, we choose to scale mesh size per part. That means that when you come to your model, it's going to take the size of the whole component and you will use that to decide on how to do the meshing. There are other advanced settings. Here you can decide to either use a linear or parabolic, and then order of elements, create curved mesh. All these things, if you set too many of them, they are going to give you a lengthy processing time. So it is a matter of really choosing between how long you want to stay before you get your results and how accurate you want those results to be. Also, before you even start the simulation workspace, you can also decide on adaptive mesh refinement. Adaptive mesh refinement, which is refinement control, right now it is set to none. You can set it to low, medium, high, or custom. What happens here is that this will decide on is going to be an iterative process that will decide when your meshing or when your solving situation will terminate. If you set it to a particular point, it will continue. It will set that tolerance in such a way that it will continue solving this problem over and over until there is no change until the changes between the iterations are as small as the tolerances you specify here. But let us just go back and not change anything here, and then we are now ready to choose. We are now ready to accept static loading and static simulation, and then our simulation now is in this video demo. Now, we are going to do 4 things. Number 1, we will set the constraints. We set the constraints on this body. Number 2, we set the loading. Number 3, which we might have already done earlier, is the meshing settings. We could set the meshing settings early. We can set them late. So it all depends on us, because if you have not set the meshing setting well before, you can come to manage here, and settings will give you that same menu that we saw earlier on. So we can cancel that. So we do the first thing, as we said, is to set the constraints, then the loading, then the mesh setting. And after we have done that, the last thing we do before we go into solving is to look at the contacts, because the contacts tell us how the different components relate to one another. It is possible to induce load on a component without loading it directly, and that load can come from the contact it makes with the other components. We have to do at least those 4 things before we move on. Now, how do we set this in motion? What constraints will this have? Here, we are assuming that on this hinge, this is the part that is hooked to the supporting structure. That is the frame of the door. And how is it hooked to the supporting structure? We have several things we can do. When it comes to constraint, we bring a constraint down. We talk of structural constraint. The structural constraints we are given here are the fixed constraints. It doesn't have to be fixed. You can have fixed, pane, frictionless, and all sorts. But let us look at the fixed constraints. If we choose a fixed constraint, you can choose a surface. For instance, we can choose this surface and we can say the surface should be fixed. But does that really give the realistic boundary condition we are dealing with? That's the question. We could also go to the back of this particular element and make it fixed. We think not. We think that what is most, see, look at this circle here. That circle is what will essentially hold the screw. And that screw is fixed into the wall. We are selecting this, and this as the three edges that will be fixed. So we do not insist that the whole surface be fixed, but we are saying that those three edges will be fixed because those are the edges that carry the screws, and those screws are rigidly fixed. So let us choose that. If we're happy with that, we can select OK. So that is our set of constraints. This already sets the constraints for this simple problem. So the next thing we need to do, we've already set the meshing arrangement, and then so we can now talk about the loads. If we talk about the loads, again, we can go to the loading tool here, and then we can select structural loads. If you select structural loads, again, we are presented with this menu. So what type? Is it a force? It can be a force, it can be a pressure, it can be a moment, it can be a remote force, bearing load, hydrostatic pressure, and so on. But let us select force. If you select force, again, we have to select the targets. Now, we can select all these 4 screw holes because these are the things that will support the door, and this is where the force exercised by the door will be felt on this. So we might decide to select that, and that will be fair. But for simplicity, we're just going to look at these two. We're just going to look at these two, this one, and this one, and this one, and we are going to look at our direction here. We are going to look at the negative x-axis, and we're going to put minus. We're going to put minus 500. Let us see how that starts. So we can put minus 500 in those 2 places, and we can say OK. So that will be the load 2 are there. So let us say OK. Let us say OK. So we have the load in there. So we have done the meshing description. We have done the constraint. We have given the loads. After doing those 3, the next thing we need to do is to look at our contacts. We look at our contacts, we will have to, the easiest way to go is to look at the contacts and ask it to automatically generate the contacts. Now, once you tell it to generate the contacts, it presents you with this menu, which is contact detection tolerance. Contact detection tolerance specifies the tolerance below which it will assume that the bodies are meeting. If anything is closer to each other right now than 0.1 millimeters, it will make that assumption. I will generate a contact for them. But notice that there are contacts, there are areas that can be closed here that we do not want any contact. For instance, if you were to close this hinge here, this inner will come into this space, but it is not at any time going to be of interest to us, going to be in contact with this inner part. So we are not, but let us choose generate. So it is generating the contacts for us. Now it has finished generating the contacts, and it didn't return to tell us anything. If you want to see what contacts are actually generated, what we do is to go to manage contacts. When we manage contacts, we'll see we can list the contacts, we can list them by contact set, bonded, and if we want to see, it will tell you pin 1 to body 1 face 1 57, outer 1 to body 1 face 2 37. That is this one, and it is assuming that they are bonded to each other. Or you can list the contacts by bodies. If you list the contact by body, it will tell you, okay, inner has 1, 2, 3, 4 contacts. as far as this is concerned, there are 4 contacts between inner and the body. And then between pin and the body, there are 9 contacts. Okay, no, not 9, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 11. And then between outer and the body, there are this number of contacts. Now, there's no problem with these contacts that have been created for us automatically. The only thing is that we do not want them to be bonded, because remember, in our hinge, we expect the contacts here. We expect the outer to move with respect to this pin, and we expect the pin and inner to have to give room for relative motion. So we are not going to accept this. Instead, what we do is that we are going to select all the contacts, and we are going to just choose separation for one of them. When we choose separation for one of them, it automatically goes and does separation for all the contacts, because that's all we are going to do. And once we do that, we have already finished our contacts, so we can select OK. So with that, we can do a pre-check. We can do a pre-check just before we go into simulation. We can check and see whether things are going well for us or not. It says there are some unconstrained groups. These are warnings that I think are ignorable at this stage, and we can begin to solve, or we can generate mesh before we solve. We can do either of the two. In this case, if you generate mesh, it will do the generation of the mesh on your system, but when you want to solve, it gives you an opportunity to go and solve on the web. But if you just go to solve, you can choose to go and solve on the web. You will do the mesh generation straight there, and everything will be done all at once. So that is the way this will work. But so you can now go and choose your solution method. When we get to solve, if you choose solve, you can decide to solve on cloud, or you can solve locally. In this particular problem, it is small enough that you can solve locally, and you just click solve, and it will go into the solve mode. Now we can continue with our presenting the results coming from the solve. We go to the solve now, and we can look at if we click the mesh, we can generate the mesh. This is a mesh of the upper part of the pane after we have enlarged it. This is the actual mesh that was used, and this is actually the result given in terms of the von Mises stress. And it's color coded so that you can, just by looking at it, you can see where it's getting redder, yellow to red. Those are the areas of maximum stresses, and where you are having dark colors to blue, blue to dark, you are having close to zero stresses. So you can see that the edges of this pane are basically free of load. They are essentially there for aesthetics. They are not carrying anything. If you really want to do away with them, it's not going to cause any structural problem for you. So notice that as a result of meshing, each object is independently, the software is able to use separate minimum sizes in each section. You can see that the mesh sizes here are bigger than the mesh sizes inner here. So if you go to the inner component, again, we have displayed both the mesh differently from the solution coloring scheme. Again, these are the stresses showing here, the von Mises stresses, megapascals, and then these are the areas of high stress. You can see that actually, if we were to cut this material in this way, there would be no problem. There would have been no problem, because most of this material is not really bearing a lot of stresses. We'll get to that when we are looking at material reduction at a later stage. So again, this is the third component, that is the outer. If you look at it, this is the meshing of it, and this is actually a demonstration of the displacement that has happened to it as a result of this extreme loading. In fact, the loading we gave it is far in excess of the loading that a normal door will give, just for the purpose of this our analysis. Sometimes you deliberately overload the element to see where problems will likely arise first. So we will talk more about that at a later stage. This is the full assembly of the mesh, and then we just showed this part of this mesh to show that even though we are seeing only the external surface here, there is still the meshing that is happening on the pin that is being covered up in this situation. So this is what is going on inside there. And then this is the full hinge. After we are showing the way it would deform after this extreme load. And again, despite the fact that the load is very high, we can see that a lot of there are still parts of this body that is really scarcely feeling any serious loading. So that means if we had cut this hinge a little bit more on this side or more on this side, the outer will not have felt, or even more on this side, would not have been any more stressed. And then we can also change the level of stresses that we want to be shown. Many of these things are possible at this stage. Lastly, we will show how you can inspect your system or the results using what we call surface probes. If you go to the inspect tool, which is one of the tools, in inspecting the results, one of the ways we can get specific information on this result is to use surface probes. To get into surface probe, you must activate the result. In this case now of the loading of the simulations we've done, I'm activating the result of study 4 here, and that has the eye right now. So the result is activated, and I can go to inspect here and choose surface probes. If I click on surface probe and I say OK, I click on surface probes. What is it? Surface probes, and then I can go anywhere. For instance, let us look at this edge here. Surface probe here. Surface probe in the middle here. One at this edge here, another one at this edge here. So here, surface probe here, surface probe here, and here. And then let us look at this very serious edge here. And so if I'm happy with those places, or maybe somewhere in the middle here and this point here. Okay, let's put some surface probes on the pin. Let's say one here and one here. Now, what do this tell us? Let's say click OK. What these surface probes tell us are as follows. First of all, we can see that the stresses around here are very low. Now, the cutting, when we cut a space for the inner out of the outer body, the area where we really have problems are the extreme edges of that inner object. In the initial area, we can afford to make it smaller or bigger here. It's not going to affect much. And it is the opposite of that for the inner. It is this area where it's needing a little bit more room. So you can see that we can actually change the design. This is a product that is already in the market, but we can improve on the design, because you can see that where they are trying to economize is not really where it's needed. Where there is need for, we need more material here and less material here, which means we can reduce this and increase this at this point. And the opposite happens at this. So we should increase this and reduce this, which is one of the results that we can see now from the surface probe. See, whereas here is 21 megapascals, but the area adjacent to it in inner is 397 megapascals. On the contrary, look here, we have 16 megapascals of stress at this edge here, which is very small. But see, the area adjacent to it in outer is giving us 387 megapascals. So this design, we can optimize design in such a way as to reduce this stress loading and increase this to balance everything out. There are so many things we can see once you get to the analysis section, that a lot of redesign can be done. In fact, if we begin to place many of the objects that we know, into serious design analysis, we'll be able to see so many things that could be improved upon from the basis of engineering design on them. By the time you look at them here, and data will not lie. So the data about it, you can see the amount of stresses that you are seeing there. Apart from surface probes, there are several other things you can do. We can have, we can create a point probe. We can also get reactions and create slice planes, so many things. But for this particular example, let's just stick with surface probe. We use the other ones at a later stage.